You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 19th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program.
E quindi non ci venite a spiegare dove avremmo potuto mettere dei soldi che voi avete bruciato per far ristrutturare le seconde case a gente che se lo poteva permettere.
A fiery Giorgia Meloni chastises those who would challenge her budget chops as she fights to project Italy as a fiscally responsible nation at a time when many other countries are struggling to do the same. After that, to the UK, which is joining an Asia-Pacific trade deal this week, the first country outside the region to do so. We'll also get the latest headlines from the world of aviation, and then it is our final global countdown of the year. Fernando, what have you crafted for us?
Hello, Chris. Today we look at the most successful countries musically this year.
Can't wait, Fernando. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Now, about a decade ago, if you had suggested that Italy would be projecting itself as an island of fiscal stability while countries like Germany, France, and the United States are struggling to get their finances in order, well, you would have been laughed out of the room. But today it is Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni who is defiantly backing a budget that promises fiscal discipline in line with the European Union's fiscal rules. It's not all smooth sailing for Italy's government. However, the Deputy Prime Minister, Matteo Salvini, faces a trial tomorrow that could land him a 6-year jail sentence. Well, to unpack some of this, we're joined by Amy Casman, Rome correspondent for the Financial Times. Amy, great to have you on the show. What is the latest, first of all, on kind of the wrangling, I suppose, over Italy's budget in Parliament? Is there any doubt that it will be passed?
Look, Giorgia Meloni's ruling coalition, which consists of three parties, has a very strong majority, and there really is no doubt that it'll be passed. The opposition has tried to blow holes in the budget. They've complained not enough spending to healthcare. They want to see items, cut to make room for more healthcare spending. But the government really looks set to get this budget through down to the wire. It will be. They're planning to have a vote tomorrow, right before Christmas, and then they're hoping that the upper house of parliament will pass it prior to the new year, bringing them down to the wire, but in on time.
And how controversial, I suppose, is this budget for Italy, for its people? How hard has it been for Italy to try and get its finances in order?
So look, Italy is one of the most heavily indebted countries in Europe. It has a very high debt burden, and a lot of what it spends every year is interest on its old debt. Now, Italy has managed to do something very interesting in recent weeks. Bond market investors have become very impressed with the Meloni government's commitment to fiscal rectitude. And as a result of that, the interest rate at which Italy has to borrow has come down. So as Italy is refinancing some of its huge debt pile, it's doing so at lower costs. And that frees up money that Italy can spend elsewhere. So what you see in this deficit isn't a ton of cutting, but what you do see is not a lot of increasing to make, to kind of compensate for inflationary pressures. So it doesn't seem too painful, but it's not also very expansionary. Meloni has tried to give tax breaks to those that she sees as kind of the highest tax and put a little more money into people's pockets, but they really don't have very much maneuvering room to play with.
Well, maybe they don't have much maneuvering room, but at the same time, I'm curious what you feel this says about Meloni herself. Is she proving, I guess, either adept or also kind of more of an establishment figure than people would have given her credit for? The fact that she is sort of taking this line that Italy does have to get its finances in order. It does have to be the responsible nation here.
I think that it's important to remember that just a few weeks or maybe months before Meloni's own election and her, swearing in as Italy's prime minister, she had the opportunity to observe the brief, short-lived UK Liz Truss premiership. And I think that was a lesson, if one was needed, about the importance of keeping the markets happy and on side, and how quickly your political career could tumble if the markets decide that you are out of control and totally irresponsible. So I think Meloni has understood from very early on the need to reassure markets of her commitment to kind of fiscal rectitude, fiscal prudence, and I think she's understood that the opposition here is very fragmented and doesn't really pose a huge challenge to her. But if the markets decide that she's fiscally irresponsible and the interest rate soars for Italian debt, I think Meloni could find that she came under a lot of pressure very quickly to go. So I think since the beginning, she has been very committed to trying to follow a path of fiscal rectitude. And indeed, in that way, she is very much more of an establishment figure than maybe people were expecting. And her finance minister, Giancarlo Giorgetti, it's important to remember, worked very closely with the Draghi government. He wasn't the finance minister, but he was in another key economic ministry. So I think the team around Meloni and the people around her and her herself understand very well the importance of keeping the markets happy. And of course, the EU budget rules have come into force. So they do have to kind of also keep Brussels happy. And that is certainly what they're trying to do with a fiscal roadmap that sees them trying to reach the EU target of bringing the fiscal deficit under 3% by within the next couple of years. Now, I think their target is 2026 or 2027.
Well, Amy, one other thing we did want to ask you about, Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini faces trial tomorrow, and this is over his role, rather infamously, in holding migrants offshore back in 2019. What can we expect from that?
Well, in fact, tomorrow's not just the trial. It is, in fact, the expected verdict in a trial that's already taken place. So this is the culmination of a very long legal process that has seen Salvini really coming under the spotlight for his conduct in how he treated a boatload of around 150 migrants that had been rescued from the Mediterranean Sea and were seeking to disembark in Italy as kind of international law allows for. And he refused to sign the paperwork that would, he was the interior minister at the time. It was not Meloni's government. It was another coalition in which his party, the League, was part. He was the interior minister, and he refused to sign the paperwork for this boat to dock in a standoff that lasted almost 3 weeks. And the conditions on board the ship were getting worse and worse. People were getting really desperate. Some people even jumped into the water to try to swim to land. They were so psychologically kind of distraught and uncertain about what was going to happen to them. And in the end, a court finally ordered Salvini to sort of sign the papers, or ordered officials to let the boat land anyway. People were allowed to disembark. But prosecutors have prosecuted him for kidnapping and other crimes, and have sought a very harsh 6-year prison sentence to kind of suggest that this was just not acceptable, what he did, and that it was a dereliction of his official duties.
And do we have any prospects, or do we have any sense of what the verdict might be just finally on that? I mean, it is quite the case to take an interior minister to hold them account for something like this.
I mean, the judiciary have certainly proven willing to go head to head with the Meloni government on and other governmental figures when it perceives that they are not kind of living up to their institutional responsibilities, or if they're finding fault with them. Meloni has been at odds with the judiciary over the fate of her Albania migration scheme, where she wants to hold migrants that tried to come to Italy offshore in Italian-run centers in Albania. And courts have refused to give the okay to that. So we've had this spectacle of migrants taken to Albania, put in these centers, and then being ferried back a day or two later after courts reject their detention in these centers in Albania. So the courts do have a lot of independence here, and they have shown themselves willing to take a stand against what they feel to be errant officials. So whether you can describe what happened with this open arms boat to be kidnapping, maybe, does the kidnapping law really apply to these circumstances? Uncertain, but there is a strong sense that, there's a good chance that Salvini could indeed be convicted and sentenced to some kind of, convicted of a crime and sentenced to some kind of prison. However, it's important to remember that in Italy, no one goes to prison unless they have seriously large quantities of blood on their hands until they exhaust all their appeals process. So Salvini has already said that even if he's convicted, he won't resign. And there's little chance that he'll be hauled off to jail tomorrow. But it will certainly be a bit of a jolt to Meloni's coalition and add a kind of a new dynamic that you now have a deputy prime minister who's been convicted of quite a serious crime, if indeed that's what happens. So all eyes on the court tomorrow morning.
Amy Kasman, Rome correspondent for the Financial Times, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Anita Riota with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will join EU leaders in Brussels today to discuss the bloc's continued support of Kyiv. European diplomats have said the meeting is meant to be a clear signal to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump that the EU will not waver in its commitment to Ukraine. The Human Rights Watch has said that Israel has killed thousands of Palestinians in Gaza by denying them clean water. The organization argued the deprivation legally amounts to acts of genocide. The United States Congress has 2 days to avoid a partial government shutdown. The deadlock comes after President-elect Trump rejected a bipartisan spending bill. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita. The United Kingdom at the start of this week formally joined the Asia-Pacific trade deal, known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, a mouthful known by the equally mouthful acronym CPTPP, which you will be hearing a fair amount in this interview. The UK is the first country not in the Asia-Pacific region to join. Martin Kent is the UK's Trade Commissioner for the Asia-Pacific region, and he joined me earlier in the studio to talk about the deal and began by discussing why the UK joining was a significant milestone.
Well, it's certainly a moment we've built up for a long time. So 15th of December, date absolutely worth noting in terms of entry into force for businesses, for the tariffs, the investment protections and all the various elements that impact business for CPTPP. What's significant? The big changes are we will for the first time ever have a free trade agreement with Brunei and also with Malaysia. And for those countries where we already have a free trade agreement that are parties to CPTPP, additional investment protections and other elements of the wider agreement come into play.
It is a big one, and I do have to ask you particularly just about the fact that December 15th is coming along at a time where we are talking a lot about tariffs in different parts of the world. Many countries are raising tariffs rather than lowering them, whether that's the US, obviously, and the incoming Trump administration, or Europe and the US worrying about cheap cars from China. How are you making the case, I suppose, that entering CPTPP helps the UK at this kind of sensitive time for free trade?
Well, as a trading nation, the UK's position around this is quite clear. So we are incredibly positive about CPTPP. We've been very positive about the new free trade agreements that we've signed following Brexit, but also those additional agreements, whether they're the digital economy agreement with Singapore, whether it's enhanced trade partnerships that we've signed in both Thailand and Taiwan. So our position is very clear, and we fundamentally agree with the the core principles of CPTPP. And those core principles are a track record of compliance with the rules-based international system, very high standards of trade, and thirdly, to achieve consensus of all parties. It's very much a consensus arrangement, and that allows like-minded countries with a shared outlook and vision for the global trading system to work together in concert for those shared beliefs.
Is that part of what this is about when you say like-minded countries? I know that China's entrance into the CPTPP has been delayed for the moment. So is that perhaps what the benefits are of a trade agreement like this? That, we are talking a lot about China, but they're not a part of it. So tariffs, those kinds of things with certain countries where there are more difficulties and we don't believe necessarily in their trading practices, those countries are left out.
So CPTPP is a consensus-based agreement with those high standards, with the track record of compliance with the international-based system. So what it absolutely isn't saying is that there's certain countries that can't join it. What it does do is lay out the standards required to join. And the UK, as the newest party to the agreement, is a manifestation that it is an agreement that's designed to expand. So it's incorrect to say that there are certain parties that are being excluded. But security, trade and prosperity are all fundamentally linked. And that's why the Asia-Pacific region as a whole remains so important to this government. And the Foreign Secretary has made very clear that security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific is indivisible from security and prosperity in the Euro-Atlantic. And with a new government that's focusing on an economic growth mission as its first mission of a new government, these kind of trading relationships and trading groups are particularly important at this time.
And tell me more about how, I suppose, you made the case being in Singapore, the contacts you had over there. Why was it important for the UK to join CPTPP as the first non-Asia-Pacific member of this trading bloc when other European nations haven't?
The UK being an independent trading nation allows us to join it. And it means it's one of the options that were on the table. And it's an agreement that's designed to grow. Importantly, it's a large market that's growing at quite a substantial rate. And actually in Singapore, as an example, the UK has a fantastic presence in Singapore. There's over 6,000 British businesses in Singapore. And that number is increasing all the time. With CPTPP come things like investment protection, which make those British investments safer in places like Singapore and elsewhere, and also vice versa. So these are symbolic of deep relationships that expand far beyond just the simple export and import numbers, which often it can be simplified to in arguments. They're far broader than that.
And now with the UK entering CPTPP, I suppose the question is, what kind of things will you advocate when it comes to potentially expanding this further? Would the UK like to see the European Union enter into negotiations, for example, to join, or any other countries beyond the Asia-Pacific region? Is that a vision for this?
Well, so one of the rules of being party to the CPTPP agreement is that no individual member ever discusses their own personal preferences. That's all done by consensus, and very rightly that's done behind closed doors as a group. But the next country to accede will be Costa Rica. That news is the next step in expanding this agreement. And as you know, publicly there are a good number of markets that have expressed an interest in acceding. We're having conversations with many of them, particularly because the UK is in that really interesting position that we are the most recent joiner, and therefore we have the most current knowledge of the processes and the systems to make sure that process is successful.
And just finally, I wonder if you can talk a little about this shift, I suppose, to the Asia-Pacific, when you did mention Brexit as well. I suppose the question is, do you expect to some degree, will there be British companies that say, prioritize the Asia-Pacific over Europe, or how do you see that relationship with the UK and Europe and the UK and the Asia-Pacific? Also for businesses, is there some encouragement for the go to one or the other, or do you expect them to open businesses in both and keep both of those relationships going?
Europe always remains incredibly important to the UK, as does the Middle East, as does India, as does the Asia Pacific region. And having worked in business myself before this role, it all comes down to the numbers. So all of these agreements, the partnership agreements, the CPTPP, they fundamentally change the numbers in the modelling for businesses to decide where to export to, where to sell, where to invest. So all of these agreements, and the UK's working on a good number across the region. In Asia Pacific, we're renegotiating our free trade agreement with South Korea, and we're hoping that's going to be world class in terms of services and digital in particular. But all of these agreements incrementally make the trading conditions better. The UK's will never force businesses to invest or export anywhere in particular, but we're there to continuously change the operating conditions so that we provide the strongest possible platform for UK businesses to trade in each region.
That was Martin Kent, the UK's Trade Commissioner for the Asia Pacific region. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermak, and it's time now for a look at what's making the headlines in the world of aviation. And for that, I'm joined by the aviation analyst, Sally Gethin. Sally, great to have you on the show as always. We are going to start with Boeing, which is finally able to project some good news. It's putting a strike behind it.
Yeah, so Boeing seems finally to be turning the corner, but it's taken nigh on 12 months for that. If you remember, the start of the year was really difficult because of the Alaska Airlines incident where an emergency door blew out, and that kind of set in motion a whole series of events for Boeing where it was always on the back foot. A lot of changes this year, and now we've got Kelly Ortberg, the new CEO. But the good news is that aircraft production has resumed. There was a big industrial action, a strike in November, which really brought a lot of aircraft production to a halt. But the wide-body aircraft, the 777X, for example, is going back into production, and also the 737 MAX, which is the single-aisle airplane.
Sally, do we have any sense, I guess, of kind of how far Boeing has been placed on the back foot by all of this? I mean, can they catch up in the new year as they start to ramp up production again? There must be a lot of airlines out there that are looking for planes.
Yeah, so aviation is always a strong market. Ultimately, it goes through cycles, ups and downs, and Boeing obviously has had a lot of problems, as I said, but ultimately there's always a lot of demand, and in fact there's not enough aircraft available at the moment for airlines demand. They need to fill capacity, so whatever Boeing does now, it's going to be a growth curve for it. But having said that, it did hemorrhage so much revenue with all the problems that it had this year. It's not out of the woods yet either, because the regulator will be heavily scrutinising production, and if there's the first sign of any quality control issues, it might put the squeeze back on. But it is looking a lot better than it has been this year for Boeing.
Well, Sally, to move on to sort of airport news that you have for us from right here in the UK, Heathrow is getting a massive injection of cash. What are they going to do with it all? Yeah,
so it's actually privately, it's private sector finance. It's not subsidised or any public sector money involved with this. And all this is going towards, it's 2.3 billion UK pounds, and it's really going to be used over the next 2 years to upgrade what is the largest gateway in London, but also the gateway for the UK to the rest of the world. A lot of this investment will go towards maintaining improvements, the passenger experience, baggage handling, for example, and sustainability initiatives. Really, Heathrow needs a third runway, but it can't push that. It's the CEO has actually recently said to the government, well, we'll wait on you. You need to, signpost what the growth plans are. And we have a new government in place this year in the UK, and it doesn't look that promising that the government will give the green light. So really, that's what Heathrow has to do. It has to upgrade to remain competitive on the world stage amongst the major international hubs.
Third runway still pending. Well, just finally, Sally, we have some stories or news from China, which has seen record passenger traffic this year.
Yeah, it's just incredible, really, because if you recall, China was the slowest to come out of the pandemic. It was very, very cautious. And as a result, passenger numbers and traffic didn't come back for a long time. But anyway, unbelievably now that right at the end of 2024, we hear that according to the Chinese civil aviation industry, the CAC administrator, that's over 700 million passengers have been transported in travel this year in China, and that's over 10% higher than the pre-pandemic record in 2019. And not only that, but it represents an annual improvement of over 18%. And international traffic is recovering. It's not quite at the levels as it was before. Domestic is much higher, but even so, international traffic is doing well. And the Chinese government is easing visa-free travel for certain nations as well coming forward. So that will boost inbound tourism and international traffic for China. So, yeah, very, very healthy figures for China.
Sally Gethin, aviation analyst, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, you did just hear that jingle because it is Thursday, which means we're back for a final global countdown of the year with Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent and musical curator. Have we reached the end of the year, Faye?
We did. So with that, I have to do a special global countdown, right?
I mean, you've done quite a few specials this year. You've been leaning into the specials,
yes.
Which, I mean, no complaints. What is our special for the end of this year?
So today I decided to look at the most successful countries musically. And how did I do this? So basically, we have a global music chart, and they released the 100 songs of the year. So I've compiled what countries, what music acts, where are they from. You know, this is all data-driven. So it's not just Fernando's view on this.
This is what we do. It's data-driven.
It's I'm a data man.
Does that mean you would have picked other things if you could have?
I would probably pick other things. But at number 5, Chris, of course, maybe this is not a surprise, but it is South Korea. I mean, K-pop is not a fad. It's here to stay. And one example of that is the song that we're going to play here, which was the fastest song to surpass 1 billion streams on Spotify. So it is a big deal. This is Jungkook featuring Leto with 7.
You're up around me and you give me life, and that's why night after night I'll be loving you right. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 7 days a week, every hour, every minute, every second.
It is incredibly catchy, right?
It is very catchy. It is incredible how far this goes when you say like reaching 1 billion streams so quickly.
The fastest. And of course, I have to say Jungkook is a member of BTS, the Almighty.
Almighty.
Almighty. I think they deserve that word almost for their importance commercially as well.
Was there a point where we thought K-pop was going away and then it returned?
Especially here in the Monocle context, I don't think it's going away. It's just not like the new thing, the new kid on the block. And I've always said, I think we should also look to other countries like Vietnam, who has amazing pop scene. So I think K-pop is just there. It's like, it's like pop.
It's the establishment now.
It's the establishment. So it's not the cool new kid, but they still do amazing things.
Well, let's move on to number 4. This is interesting. I don't know if I would have expected this country to be number 4.
Perhaps it is the most surprising. It is not Puerto Rico, but from the Americas, we have Colombia representing. Colombia has always been great with music. You have Shakira, Maluma, but this year in particular, there's so many artists. We have Karol G, but the top song from Colombia in the global charts was this beautiful reggaeton heartbreak song by Fade and ATL Jacob with Luna.
De mí, de mí, fue que día te olvidaste de mí y de mí y yo de ti.
It is interesting, Faye, that you sort of put reggaeton with Colombia in there as a mix. Reggaeton, heartbreak, Colombian song.
Yes, and that's the interesting thing, because reggaeton, you would imagine like shake your booty on a dance floor or something like that. But this is more kind of pared down. And I think he got inspiration.
Soft reggaeton.
Soft reggaeton. He was in Madrid, apparently, looking through a window, and he was looking at the moon, because Luna is moon. And I think he'd just been having a few heartbreaks himself. So yeah, it's a nice track. And you know what? It's funny because it's from Colombia, but Italian radio gave the first opportunity for this track. I don't think it was going to be released as a single, but Italian radio liked it, and then it spread all over the world.
I do love how that happens sometimes. It is sort of random countries that sort of grab hold of something, and you kind of hear it there and nowhere else, but then it does eventually spread from there. Let's move on. Number 3.
It's Canada. You know, again, they're very quiet, but they're always very established in the world of music.
Canada's one of those countries I feel like you're often surprised to realize how many artists are actually Canadian.
Absolutely. And of course, we have The Weeknd, you know, The Weeknd. He was still in the global charts. But the top Canadian single of the year goes to 21-year-old singer. Her name is Tate McRae. The song is called Greedy. It's an ode to female empowerment, this song. And he won it's very catchy. Won the Single of the Year, the Juno Awards, which is the Canadian Grammys. So, you know, she's respected. She's there, top of the game.
Top of the game. Nice track. Let's move on to right here in the UK, which is number 2.
We're staying a bit closer. Yes, indeed, the UK. And I love this track. It's described as a retro-futuristic sound. It's a little bit gloomy. I still like it. It is by the singer from Oxfordshire, Artemis. I Like the Way You Kiss Me.
I like the way you kiss me. I can tell you miss me. I can tell it is. Not trying to be romantic. I'll hit it from the back just so you don't get attached. I like the way you kiss me. I can tell you miss me.
You're kind of bouncing along there, Chris.
I do. It is a catchy song. We have heard this one a lot over here in the UK, which I guess is not surprising, given it is the most played song here in the UK.
Not surprising. But I have a feeling that now...
how much it's moved beyond the UK. Do we have a sense of that?
It moved a lot.
Global.
It's global. In fact, it was never number 1 in the UK itself. It did very well in the charts in number 3, but it was number 1 in so many European countries. I think Europe kind of likes this kind of retro-futuristic sound. Mildly gloomy as well.
Mildly gloomy. Well, I guess it's no surprise which country is number 1. We're just, what can I say, Faye? We're the greatest.
And let's give it to the US, you know, because I'm here every week talking about, you know, Congolese pop or Vietnamese hyperpop, whatever. But the US is so established, and still they are at the top of their game.
Just dominant, yes.
Very dominant, I have to say. But we have the number 1 single in the US and in many other parts of the world. I mean, he's a 22-year-old. He's a very sweet guy, very religious. It's a nice ballad. I have nothing against it. Let's play Benson Boone with Beautiful Things.
These beautiful things that I've got, please stay. I want you, I need you, oh God. Don't take these beautiful things that I've got.
Faye, I do remember when this came out. I think you were doing another special and you were struggling to find countries where this was not number 1.
It was a struggle. And I have to admit, I mean, this song really dominated the charts. And one interesting thing about Benson Boone, he does amazing backflips, you know. I think that's his thing, you know,
that's
backflips.
Check out the music videos.
Power ballads and backflips.
Are we happy with the US? Are we feeling like they're putting out good music these days?
I think they are, and we had an amazing year for pop. We have Sabrina Carpenter, Chappelle Roan. You know, it's still very, very exciting, and I think the other countries are still catching up. But the US is dominant in the charts, I have to admit.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent. If we don't see each other, happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Anita Riota, our researcher was Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.